So good morning, all of you. On behalf of SEPS, welcome to this special webinar on EU-Japan relations. We know that the geopolitical issues these days are very important in the context for the EU. I mean, in a global context, we see the changes on the one side, on the Western side, on the transatlantic relations, which are changing very rapidly all of a sudden again. We're looking towards the East, where we have a very well-established relationship. We just had a seminar yesterday on the EU-Japan KAI, the investment agreement with Japan, with China. And now we have this special seminar on EU-Japan relations, for which we have, I think, a very well-placed interlocutor, Professor Kanehara, who has made most of his career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan, in Tokyo, and has also been posted a long time ago, as he just told me, in Brussels. So he knows the scene very well, but he's now a professor and will explain his views on the relationship between the EU and Japan, but also on the geopolitical situation over there, which we in Europe should be sometimes a bit more aware of, but for which we now have the framework, because we have this EU-Japan partnership agreement, the EPA, which we concluded about 2 years ago, and which we're now trying to implement and to give concrete elements. And of course, this is not only a trade agreement, it's also a partnership agreement. And I think Professor Kanehara will also focus mostly on that issue. What is this? What does it mean, let's say, to have this partnership between the EU and Japan in the Pacific, in the Southeast Asian side? So welcome, Professor Kanehara. It's a pleasure that we can have you and that you're calling in this morning from Japan, from Tokyo. As I just said, let's say this is the facility of webinars these days, which we're can do easily. You're at the end of the day, we just start our day, and we also have others calling in, which will probably raise questions from the Japanese perspective or the East Asian perspective on the EU-Japan relationship. But we also have a very privileged partner here from the EU side. We have Ambassador Romano Vlahutun, which you can explain this in a moment, who is Ambassador at Large for Connectivity, with a special focus also on the Indo-Pacific, and who will comment on Professor Kanehara's views. The seminar is organized together with the mission of the Japan to the EU, with which we have very good relationship, and we're very happy to do this, also to help to bring this out here in Europe much more, let's say, how important this relationship is and how we are implementing this partnership agreement. This is organized together with my colleague Stefania Binaglia and others at SEPS, just to make it possible today. We have about 200 people who signed up, who registered for the seminar. If you want to raise questions, we have, as in normal webinars, we have the Q&A possibility and the chat box at the bottom where you can raise questions. And I will try to moderate these questions together with my colleague Stefania. I will then raise these questions during the conversation with the two speakers. We also have a questionnaire at the end, which we will circulate, which the mission of Japan would like you to hear your views on this EU-Japan relationship, but we will put a link into the chat box also at the end on which you can comment. And my colleague Stefania has just today also published a piece, an opinion piece on this relationship between the EU and Japan and the relationship towards the Indo-Pacific, on which also she can then probably raise a question at the end in the Q&A session. But without further ado, I pass the floor to Professor Kanehara to give his views from Japan on this relationship. And not only, of course, with Japan, but also with the broader Southeast Asian countries, the geopolitical situation over there, but also, I mean, how he sees this evolving, but also from their perspective, the changes in the Pacific with the United States, the new leadership, but also other things which we've seen recently, like, for example, the conclusion of the RCEP amongst all these countries in the region. So there is a lot going on, as I said, geopolitically, And we're very happy, let's say, that we can host this seminar today. Professor Kanehara.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure. I wish to explain today why Europe is very important to Japan. Let me start saying that the Asia is now joining liberal international order. This is something we achieved, the precursors of industrialization achieved with the huge amount of bloodshed, 20th century, wars, revolutions, dictatorship, many mistakes, but we earned this. And we have to protect that, maintain this. Principle is very simple. Human dignity is absolutely equal, regardless of skin color, creed, religion, ethnicity. And every people has the right to pursue his own happiness, his or her own happiness, and the government is the instrument for that. People is not the instrument of the government is the instrument for the people. That's basic thinking of us, and we share this. And Asian nations are joining this. It's not only in Europe, in the United States, Canada, but the Asian nations are proudly joining this world together with us. I have to say two things here. One is cyberspace. Amazing, isn't it? We are now talking in this way. The cyberspace is special because all the data is flying in cyberspace with the speed of light. So there's no distance, there's no time here. People are connected. This is the third Pangea. Pangea is a huge continent 200 million years ago. The continent was one, and then it spread. It was connected by navigations in the 15th century, particularly by the Europeans to Asia. And now this third Pangea, cyberspace engulfed everybody. We can communicate freely. From here, we can make sure that we share something very important. That is liberal thinking. That is conscience. That is love. That is care. We do share that. We can confirm that by seeing photos of Instagram. With maybe next decades, we could invent a translation machine and we could communicate without language barriers. And secondly, Asian nations are experiencing lastly the great leap in industrialization. They're catching up. And now China is now very big, 3 times bigger than us. Japan is nonetheless number 3 on earth. And the China might catch up with the Americans maybe in 10 years' time. India is following very quickly. Now Asia is becoming beating hard. And we have to know that they came through very difficult times. When we are opening up our parliaments and testing our liberalism, Japan opened our parliament in 1890, much earlier than Russians. And the constitution was written in 1889. First elections was 1890. We are precursors. We made big mistakes in the war, but the liberalism was, I have to say, only in Japan. Turks opened the parliament very quickly, but they shut it very quickly too. So Japan is the longest standing democracy in Asia. But at that time, while we are experimenting in the liberalism, parliamentarism, Asian nations were under colonial rules. Their dignity was trumped. But they took it back in the 1950s, 60s. But they went to dictatorship for a very quick development. But they came to democracy one by one. In Asia, it's the Philippines, 1986. Korea, 1987, they abandoned dictators. And then ASEAN nations one by one, and even communist nations turned to half capitalism. And Vietnam is there, China is there. It's only North Korea who is extremely Leninist and isolated. Asians are joining us one by one very proudly, and they turn to democracy one by one. And now we have to engage them as a new partners, and we have to make this the liberal international order, not only European, American, Japanese idea, but the global idea. For that purpose, Asia is the last piece to fit in. We have to be successful here. And the big problem is today, Chinese rise. I have to say that we believe that China will be like us one day. We had big wars, but they got they got very big success in economically. Mao could not kowtow to Russians forever. After Stalin, he defied. And he had a small war in Damansky Islands, and he was defeated bitterly.
Yeah.
And he came to us. And then the Americans, Japanese helped them very much. And we believe that China is now joining the West. They're very welcome. And Hu Yaobao, he was very close to Prime Minister Nakasone. He was talking about democracy. We believed him. Tiananmen, the kids crying freedom were massacred by PLA tanks. In Japan, only Japan stood by them. And we said, don't isolate them. They'll be like us. They just abandoned Maoism. We have to help them. And Deng Xiaoping bravely opened the door for foreign investments. He was very successful in picking up Chinese economy. But now the direction is a bit strange these days. After Lehman shock, they became very proud and very confident. They would catch up with Americans. The number one would be China in 10 years' time. That's a dream of China today. And unfortunately, the new legitimacy of Communist Party's rule is that it's not Marxism-Leninism. It's because communists kicked out all the invaders. 150 years humiliation. That history started to be exaggerated. And through national education, it's imprinted into the kids' minds. So the hugely expanding self-confidence in one part, and then imprinted the humiliation of about century. It's driving Chinese emotionally I think in a wrong way. They are leaving the West. We have to engage them. Problem is that Xi Jinping's generation is the Mao's kids' generation. They were raised in the Cultural Revolution time. They believe that, the Maoism, and they no longer yearn for liberalism like Deng Xiaoping. They believe that the other communist nation, they can be number one on earth. And they say China will never be Gorbachev's Soviet Union. We cannot engage them alone. Now we are now smaller than China, 1/3 of China economically. They will catch up with Americans, but they will never catch up Japan, US, and Europe, India, and Australia, this whole West. And if we engage ASEAN nations, the West is far bigger than China. Then we can still engage them and somehow embrace them into the right path. But it takes time. It takes maybe 2-3 decades before they peak out. For that purpose, we have to be strong. And the most important part is why liberalism is so important. Why values are so important. Simply because this is the human truth. Everybody is equal in dignity. Everybody has a right to be happy. And we create simply the governments only for that purpose. We're not instrument of the purpose. Power struggle, making money are important, but it's only means to make a stable, happy community. The government is just for that. So we need Europeans in these efforts. I have said that in Asia, Americans are the most important partner, of course. Without them, we would be swallowed by China. But with Americans, yeah, okay. But Japan is only one. This is not EU, and there's no NATO in Europe, in Asia, like in Europe. So we have no, say, Germans place in Europe. We defeated, came back, but Germans have the London and Paris, also Madrid. They have many friends around them. Japan was standing alone for a long time. Now we are facing China alone. We can't do it. We have to talk to the Koreans.
But you have Korea.
Australia is very helpful. India is, I have said, small elephant today, but their population would surpass China very quickly. And they're 10 years younger in average age. Amazing, isn't it? 1.3 billion people, just 30 years. Chinese are 40 years, and Japan the age is 50. So the shift of the gravity is moving towards the West. But when we're united, we can stop China from derailing, and we can still be trying to pull back China in our liberal system, but we have to make huge efforts for that. And we can't do it alone. We say Quad these days. Japan can't do it alone. So Americans, and please help us, Australia and the India, future superpower. We want to talk to Korea, but Korean leftist government is a bit confused these days. We wish to bring them back, but it's a bit difficult today. But beyond that, we need absolutely Europeans. Without Europe, we're going to fail in this effort. European size is 80% of the United States. You have two nuclear powers, very strong nations, and very proud, long-standing traditional democracies there. And EU, sorry for the Brexit, but the new community created by Europeans, that shows the future human community. And we have to bring in your success to Asia. The ASEAN nations are working very good for liberal multilateralism. They are not like Central Europeans, Central Asians. Big ones bully small ones, that's Central Asia. But in ASEAN, Singapore are talking to Indonesia on equal footing, and they developed multilateral liberalism. They invite Russians, Americans, Japanese, Chinese. And we have to expand their practice globally. And then Asia will be a very proud big piece in this liberal order. Okay, maybe I'll stop here. I'm happy to take up any questions. Thank you very much.
Before I pass the floor, thank you, Professor Kanehara, to Ambassador Vlahutin. If I could ask you, let's say, how you see the relationship with the United States, know that we have a new leadership in the United States with President Biden, because you worked in the cabinet office of Prime Minister Abe, and Abe was very proud to have a very good relationship with Trump. Was one of the first prime ministers to visit Trump about 4 years and a bit ago in November when Trump was just elected. How do you see this changing now? Because there was some tension also in the beginning with the relationship between Trump and Abe, in the sense that does Trump want to commit to the big troops which you have in the south of Japan and this security umbrella which you have from the United States? How do you see this now under Biden?
Mr. Trump was a very one-man type CEO of the United States. And I think he did not listen very much to the states, Pentagon, even NSC. But we are very close to have the Prime Minister very close to the President of the United States. And we're lucky. Abe-san earned this with big efforts. Now Abe-san's gone, Mr. Trump is gone. I think that Mr. Biden is a traditional, very balanced, the President of the United States. He would listen to the institutions. So NSC will coordinate Pentagon and the states and commerce and CIA. And this government will be more balanced. And I'm sure that they're going to take care of the allies. We are lucky because under Trump administration, because we are close to the United States, Washington, it's okay, but many capitals. When Abe-san went to see the European leaders and ASEAN leaders, the first question they asked Abe-san is, how could you do that? That's the first question. Why are you so good with Mr. Trump? There's no secrets. He just visits in the first place to Mr. Trump, and then they establish a personal relationship. And that was a gift for us. But now we have to go back to normalcy again. We have to persuade many competing groups in the states, Pentagon, Commerce, and they're going to establish a strategy and policy, and they're going to share that with us. And Americans have to cooperate with the Chinese too for climate change, non-proliferation issues like Iran. And they need the Chinese. But at the same time, they have to prevent wars in Asia, Taiwan invasion. It must not happen. Hong Kong is lost their freedom, sorry, but it's very difficult to take it back now. But we have to persuade China. So it's the hard part, soft part. There must be a good balance of interests, and they have to lead and to take the hands of allies. That's what we're going to expect. And transatlantic relationship would be taken care of. I'm sorry that it's hard, but for China engagement strategy, the broken transatlantic relationship is very bad for us. We need a stable, predictable relationship over the Atlantic, and that helps us a lot.
So you're confident that the change is good also for Japan as we've seen in the United States. I bring in
Yeah,
Ambassador Vlahutin. Let's say I'm very pleased that she's also joining us. For those who do not know Ambassador Vlahutin, she's Ambassador at large in the External Action Service here in Brussels on connectivity, and I will ask her to explain what this means. But she will also explain this in the context of the relationship of the EU with the, and the strategy of the EU towards the Indo-Pacific. Ambassador Vlahutin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning to Europe. Good afternoon to Asia and Asia Pacific. Let me try to explain briefly. First, why connectivity, and then why with Japan as the first partner with which we have agreed the connectivity partnership. Connectivity in terms of strategic infrastructure, of course, has always been important and has always been political. But technological advances and this cyberspace, as Professor called it, the whole digital industry, are making connectivity one of the key geopolitical tools of today. It creates kind of interdependencies that need to be managed. There are many unknowns, and there is a lot of work to be done also multilaterally. The second reason is connectivity is not value neutral. Connectivity is not about things. It's not only ports, airports, railways, etc. It shapes trade routes. It shapes also the value chains, but rules, norms, standards, in a way, it is one of the key elements of sort of the rule of law system that we cherish. And then finally, connectivity, the needs for connectivity are massive. World Bank assesses that only in Asia by 2030, there will be a need around 16 trillion, and this is a conservative estimate, investment. So connectivity requires scale, and it requires partnership with like-minded. Partnership based on fundamental principles of sustainability and a level playing field. I already mentioned that for the European Union, this connectivity partnership with Japan was the very first connectivity partnership we have negotiated and agreed. And for us, it was a logical extension of a major sort of development of a truly strategic partnership with Japan in general in the last decade that was finalized with the SPA, or Strategic Partnership Agreement. And it came very natural. I'm sorry, it came very natural. And I was negotiating. I have to say it was quite easy to negotiate because you could see that you have two like-minded partners, and it was really a pleasure to work on that. There are four elements. Maybe it would be interesting for our audience to understand how this was shaped. There are four elements of that agreement. One are the basics, the fundamentals, the policy alignment. The second one is the traditional bilateral sectoral cooperation. We're talking about energy, we're talking about digital, transport, and people-to-people connectivity. But there are two novelties in that agreement. One was agreement that we will work together with Japan in third regions, and not only in Japanese neighborhood, if you wish, but in European neighborhood as well. And we thought that was really important. So those regions are the Western Balkans, Eastern neighborhood, Central Asia, Indo-Pacific, and Africa. And the second novelty, which I think is extremely important, is our reach out to the private sector. The amount, again, of investment that is needed for connectivity is not something that any public fund can pay for. There is no public money. Right. So we have to be much smarter and much more better organized in order to incentivize and bring in the private sector. There is a very interesting figure that there was a poll conducted among European businesses that are working in Japan, and around 70% of, I'll take as an example, German businesses said that they are in Japan not for Japanese market, but for joint ventures or joint work in third markets. I think this is the future of cooperation, and this is something that we want to support, and this is something that we want to benefit from. It's also, I think, very important to look at the figures and the numbers, because especially here in Europe, sometimes we don't recognize how strong we are, and I think this is one of the key elements of proper projection of what European Union can do. We looked at the FDI figures for 2019, and I'll just read very quickly. European Union, $307 billion of foreign direct investment. Japan, $227 billion. US, $119 billion, and China, $98 billion. I think if you do the math, you can also see what immense projection capacity this is, if it is managed right. Also, there's a massive amount of capital on the markets in Europe at the moment, around 30 trillion euros idle capital, or some of it's idle capital, and we want to see whether and how it would be possible to sort of make it more dynamic. Of course, this kind of endeavor is not easy. This is a massive undertaking because there are very many parts that you have to put together. There is a political will, but there are also things that need to be better synchronized because we have different habits, we even have different budget cycles, so it's not always easy to put all of these things together. People are used to do certain things in a certain way, but we are now really making proper analysis of the regions that I have mentioned to see where are the best opportunities for our joint activities, where we can add value to our joint partnership, but also, of course, primarily to the countries that are the recipients of this. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and I think that partnership between Japan and Europe really send a message of quality, of sustainability, cutting-edge technology, of solidity, predictability, and trust. And these are expensive commodities on the markets, and I think we need to understand that and use them well. I would stop here, of course, very happy to engage in conversation and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Blahutin. Interesting to hear that, but probably I will first ask for a reaction to Professor Kanehara, how he sees this, let's say after this view from Europe on this connectivity, and above all the connectivity with Japan and with the Pacific. But if you could also highlight a point, let's say, which is a bit kind of a problem in Europe these days. If you speak about connectivity, we think about data, which is an important part of the economic partnership agreement with Japan, but we also think about the dominance of big tech. And we don't hear too much here in Europe about how you feel, how you look at this from a Japanese perspective. Let's say we have some American firms which are basically globally dominant, which also depend on technology from, as we know, from Japan, from Korea, from the region. But how do you see this, let's say, this connectivity in the domain of, I mean, as Ambassador Blahutin said, we depend on the private sector and on these investments from the private sector. But we see that in some elements of connectivity, we very much depend on American firms. How do you see this from your perspective? Is this a big issue of debate in Japan?
Yeah, okay, can I?
Yes.
Connectivity, we had a big conference of connectivity between Japan and EU. Prime Minister Abe went there.
I know, he was here then with President Juncker.
When we talk about connectivity, we're talking about the infrastructure in developing world, in particular in Asia, right? And China is doing the one way, one road.
Yeah.
We are doing the high tech and clean, high quality infrastructure. Basic competition is that we say China is now the great economic power, the heavy user of sea lanes. They want to refurbish the ports and the airports. What we did in 1960s, 70s. When they want to do that, that's fine. They do that. Must be open, must be transparent, and must be good for the recipient of money. But you can't bind them by debt. You can't rip off the ports and the mines and these things, mountains. You can't do that. The project must be sustainable financially and must be beneficial to the recipients. And we found that one characteristics of Chinese one-way, one road, that's very similar to Russian pipeline. Center is Russian pipeline. That's Russian pipeline, isn't it? The energy charter here is very different. It must be matrix, connected everywhere so that the market can function. Not the oligarchic markets management, it's market should be market. That's for us. Our high-tech, the high-quality infrastructure thing, the philosophy is connecting everybody. Ports cutting through mountains in Indochina Peninsula. We're gonna make matrix so that the data, money, merchandises, people can go in any direction so that the markets can function and the regional economy can be integrated, and that will bring more prosperity. That's our thinking. China is here, pipelines and railways. They're making one big Chinese world, satellites, downlinks, and ports, and sometimes it has some significance in terms of the military. They're making the naval ports. You don't have a big ports everywhere because big ships does not make any stop. They cut across the oceans.
Yeah.
If you don't make ports here around the world, it's just for frigates. So sometimes we doubt the intention. Sometimes we doubt the sustainability and transparency and openness. We told it clearly to Chinese Prime Minister Abe, we can cooperate for a one way, one road, as far as it goes along with our conditions.
Yeah.
So it must be open, transparent, and sustainable, and contribute to the recipients and the regional economic integration. And sometimes it's not easy. And I have to say that private money also is important. As Ambassador said, Chinese money is big, of course, but we have to show the choices for the developing countries. And there, I have to say, our private money is very big. As investor, we are very big investors in ASEAN nations, apart from Cambodia, Laos.
Yeah.
But with our private people, private investment, we can very well compete with Chinese money. And we have to show them, the ASEAN nations and Asians, the choices. They have choices. They have to think. Sometimes ours are a bit expensive, but they have good choices. Can I touch upon the decoupling part? It's not only connectivities. We are going to be decoupled from China. And this is happening at the same time. Yeah. We are consolidating connectivities, but on the top, US and China, maybe Western China is somehow being decoupled. There are several points here. Yeah. One is data, the platforms. There, Americans and Chinese are dominant. Unfortunately, Europeans and Japanese are not very strong in. We can't compete with GAFA and BAT. But there, China excludes the SNS from the West. We don't have TikTok, our TikTok function in Beijing. They exclude us, they decouple us. And they bring in the SNS system into our society. TikTok, WeChat. We don't exclude them, but Americans said, don't do it. In the States, India did the same thing. Reason is very simple. Yeah. Today's intelligence is very different from the previous intelligence. They gather whole data, electronic data, apply the AI algorithm, and they produce intelligence materials. It's very precious, huge data. And the big SNS system can collect many data. And this is a big trouble. This is one. two networks, lines, optical lines, deep sea cable. This is network. NTT is very strong here. Americans, French are very strong here too. And deep sea cable too. 5G and deep sea cable are big problems today, simply because, again, this is for data collecting. And in contingency, somebody, very bad people can disrupt the whole network. In this DX world, if this network is disrupted, everything can be paralyzed. So we can't let it happen.
Indeed, and that's where we need to have free markets to function. We need to have competition to function, and we cannot be dependent on a few. And
so we have to work
for or it's even a few big monopolies almost. And of course, we know that the Biden administration apparently will act against this in the United States. But of course, there is still the issue of China. What you mentioned, this example of TikTok, is very significant. They want to decouple us, and if they want to decouple us, they can do this. I want to ask a question to Romana. I mean, there was already quite some questions coming in. For example, I mean, there is now this attitude we have to watch out with China, but we are so dependent on China economically, meaning we have a trade deficit with China. China is exporting massively to Europe. So can we, I mean, block China off? No, we need China. Ambassador Blahutin.
It's not about blocking or about working against anyone. I think also the message of Professor Kanehara is of working for something. And here we are very, very clear. These basic principles of sustainability and level playing field are the principles that we cannot and will not in any way abandon. And this is something where I think the like-minded partners are all agreeing. There is a convergence on understanding of what does this mean. And I think Professor just best explained why connectivity is becoming so geopolitical, because this interdependence can be easily weaponized, and in order to prevent that, you have to have smart, wise management of that interdependencies. It always is based on the rules and norms that we share. You want to be predictable to each other. How you become predictable to each other? It doesn't fall from the sky. It has to come through certain standards that you share. And I think this is a very tall order also for all of us when it comes to the digital connectivity. There are so many things to think about, and also in advance. I mean, it's not easy to catch up with all the developments that are happening out there. Artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. There are so many dynamic developments, and we have to manage this together. And I think at least the signals that are coming from the US from some time is that there is full understanding of that there as well. So there is a lot of discussion on how to deal with this. It is in a way quicker than us, and we have to be able to think far in advance. I'll just give you one small metaphor. From the 1970s to today, the speed of airplanes did not change. The speed of cars went up twice. The speed of trains 3 times. But the speed of data processing 1 trillion times.
That's right.
This is a new world.
Yeah.
And we really sometimes, are still trying to use the logic and the instruments of 20th century for the 21st. That's not possible. We really have to understand the challenges of our own time. And here, this discussion on connectivity, I find precious and extremely important that we have sort of the building blocks on how we are tackling this.
Okay. Professor Kanehara, I have 2 specific questions. We got already quite some questions in, but 2 specific questions for you. One related to, I mean, as we see it from Europe, the relationship with Korea, which you have. I mean, how does this fit in to the story? Because we often see, let's say, that there is kind of sometimes a tense relationship, and you alluded a bit to this, between Japan and Korea. And how does this fit in this promotion of democracy in Asia? But then another question is that, and probably also Romana can answer to this a bit later, is that there's somebody asking the question, look, that on certain issues of liberal democracy, Japan still has another approach to certain issues than Europe. For example, on human rights, for example, I mean, Japan still has the death sentence, which we don't have in Europe anymore. And this was criticized by the United Nations Human Rights Committee, for example. You walked out of the International Whaling Committee, for example, in a sustainability context, something which has become an important issue. So we say we have the same values, but on certain issues, there are still some important differences. So the question, first of all, on the relationship with Korea, and then secondly, on the values or kind of the convergence of values between Europe and Japan.
Okay, Korea is a very important partner for us. I have to say their population is now 50 million, half of Japan. They are always in the G10 group. Their rival is Russia. Amazing, isn't it? Korean economy is now bigger than Russia today, and they're rivaling with Canada. And it's a very important partner, and they got democratized very early time in 1987, only after the Philippines. And their army is 600,000, the biggest one. I don't think any European nation has this big army. They need that to face.
Enormous.
Yeah, they need that to face North Koreans. They have 1 million, and this is a very capable nation and climbing up the ladder of the status international order very quickly. I'm very proud of them. And I have said that if you think that Japan-Korean relations is very bad, I have to tell you that millions people are going and coming back from Japan and South Korea. Tourists are by millions. I have to say, many Korean students are running here. Many Korean students want to find a job in Japan. Our culture is very close, too close. That's the reason why we sometimes have very big quarrel. I have to say that their democratization was only in 1987, and they have very strong ideological opposition between the parties, conservatives and the leftists. It's just like in Japan in 1970s. For them, domestic Cold War is not yet over because North Korea is there. Leftists is, of course, very close to North Korea, and the atmosphere is very ideological, very much divisive. And I have said when conservatives are in power, it's okay. They understand Japan, Korea, and the US should cooperate to face the oppressive communist nations and North Korea, non-proliferation, that's fine. Leftists is very different. They want coexistence with North Korea, cooperation, rapprochement. It makes a big difficulties for us, and of course many history issues too. That's first of all the domestic politics. They want to criticize their conservatives, saying that you are dogs of Japan, and they point to us. You are doing that. This is a part of our domestic. This is part of our domestic politics and part of our relationship, but it's not all. The overall relationship is not very bad at all. But I have to say, when their government was serious in this way, we have good times with the conservatives, bad times the leftists. But it happens. It's their choice of their own people. We have to live with that.
Okay? So you say the relationship is good between Korea and Japan?
This people-to-people relationship is very good. As I said, millions are going back and forth.
I wasn't aware
over the strait. Korean
and on the values issue, I mean, on these differences of certain values between Japan and Europe. I mean, like these examples I mentioned, for example, on issues on fishing, international whaling community, but also the human rights issues, the death sentence, and so on.
Oh, death sentence. Okay, the values. There's no one single absolute value. The value system is shaped by consensus of people, because every people look into his own conscience and open the door for God, truth, love, and care. And they make their own community, they polish it. We do share the roots of that. We see the same thing. You name it God, love, or truth, like Gandhi. But when it appears to the law and human rules, regulations, it takes different shape. Yeah. And it can be merged into one in the future, that's fine. But you can't impose anything upon the others because it comes from the people's conscience and the consensus. Waiting long before Europeans came to the shore of Asia, and they made whales extinct almost. We're eating them, but I have to tell you, in my hometown, there's a temple of 4 whales killed, and they buried them. We didn't eat baby whales in the wombs of the mother. We buried them, and the priests are always reading the the Buddhist lectures just to pray for the baby whales. It was part of our culture.
Okay.
And we withdrew from the southern hemisphere already. We do that only in our 200-mile zones. We know the reputation is bad, but I have to tell you, there are some people living on the whales, and we limit the number strictly based upon the scientific data. And so we can talk with that. IWC was too much politicized. That's the reason why we withdrew. But we're still there as observer and giving all data scientifically. Okay.
Okay. I will ask Ambassador Vlahutin to react, but there was also a question specifically for you, saying somebody saying, Marcus Schurman, that this connectivity agreement with Japan is extremely important, and that, for example, it's important for what you mentioned, for example, that German business is very active in Japan. But a person says, let's say that on the Japanese side, there is much less enthusiasm for that, let's say, for this involvement of European business in Japan, and that I mean, the openness on the Japanese side is not seen to be as great as it's seen from our perspective. So, and I remember, let's say, also in the discussions on the economic partnership agreement, this was one of the issues, let's say, that on certain sectors, access to the Japanese market was difficult. So, I mean, how do you see this, Ambassador, and how do you see this evolving, this openness of Japanese business towards European business in cooperation? Because the person refers specifically to access through Japan to other Asian nations. You're mute, Ambassador.
I'm sorry. I also forgot to finish in a way the thought that was linked to the first question on dependencies, or you said, or your proposition was that EU is dependent on China. I would say that China is dependent on the EU as well. So this dependency or interdependency is prevalent, and this is something that we need to tackle. On the values, I think, as Professor said, it's a question of convergence. It's a question of discussion, convergence, and dialogue. And it's very interesting. I was watching this debate on climate neutrality. You know, Europe started first. Europe was a leader and announced that we have decided to become climate neutral by 2050. And I would say also we were a very stubborn leader. And then a few months ago, Japan came up with the same conclusion that they want to be climate neutral by 2050. So certain discussions that you couldn't have maybe 3, 4, or 5 years ago, you can have now. And it is a question of really engaging and trying to identify what are the common interests for all of us. I was just thinking, I was already born where women in Switzerland couldn't vote. They did not have right to vote. I'm not that old, so it's really something that we also have to think in terms of the perspective and the change that is coming. In terms of enthusiasm on the Japanese side to engage, I think I already mentioned the word trust, and what we have also understood, for example, looking at the regions where we want to work together, that Japanese partners feel more comfortable of working together with us in the regions that they know well, but less comfortable in the regions that they don't know. And this is exactly a part of our offer. We know those regions. Let us also help you work together with us. It's really about learning from each other and creating a knowledge and trust base that would eventually benefit both sides. There is an interesting number, for example, when it comes to engineering exchange. There is one program where European engineers can go to Japan and Japanese engineers can go to Europe. And there was always many more European applicants than Japanese because of what I understand is simply a different work culture. If you leave the firm where you work, it's not so easy to come and be integrated again. But that is changing as well. So I think the only thing that is predictable here is change, and I hope to the better. And in that sense, I really value this engagement. We started the partnership in 2019, and we have also already learned, what we can do, but we also learned about where we have to change things. And that is very important as well. So on the market access, I'm not an expert, but I know that there is a very serious engagement on changing also some of the habits or some of the perceptions and understanding what in the end is the real interest. And we in the EU, we are the result of connectivity. When you look at the EU, we are where we are because of connectivity. So maybe we even have a little bit more sophisticated knowledge, if you wish, or a little bit more experience on what benefits it brings in terms of economic growth, in terms of sustainability, and in terms of societal development. And again, what is important here is that we agree on the fundamentals and that we have more than goodwill to discuss this.
Okay, thank you, Romana. I have some further questions for Professor Kanehara. There's a question, about the risk of the COVID crisis and the risk to, that we are turning back to more protectionism and national solutions at the regional level, or that there is a risk eventually of the US trying to decouple us from China. This is a question from Emmanuel Dra from the University of Strasbourg. Another question is about, values again. Let's say, why is this link between values and Japan and Europe so important? But why don't have this link of values with China, for example? Is this the values between China and Japan so different? This is a question from another attendee. Yeah, there was a further question about the Japan-Korea relationship. But anyway, you commented upon this. Probably a final question for you is what do you expect, let's say, from the Quad prospects of taking the lead in the region? Let's say, of course, which is the US, India, Australia, and Japan. What is going to happen? And probably then to Ambassador Vlahutin, the question, let's say, when will the EU Indo-Pacific strategy be adopted? But you can answer to that in a moment then. So Professor Kanehara, specifically on this risk of protectionism and decoupling, or say kind of splitting up the world in different blocks, which the US would also try to do in its strategy towards China.
Okay, protectionism is coming from the United States only. They don't, they accept the TPP and these things. I have said that's the Trumpians. They are the people who are working in the steel industry, coal mines, or the automobile industry, but their factories are fruit out from the United States. Their living standard did not go up, but the stock market is going up very high. Nets industry is going up very high. Without industry, how can you make a fair society? This is a very heavy burden for any government. But in the United States, when Social Security is not very thick, it burst out. And they're very angry people. And they say, no Chinese products, no Mexican workers, United States is mine. And that's them. And that makes the US is inward looking. We have to persuade them. The free trade works and it makes them more prosperous and more respected. We have to persuade them. For that purpose, Japan, EU worked hard. We just signed the Japan-EU EPA and show that to the US administration that we are working on free trade. This is protectionism. Decoupling. China is not Soviet Union. 80% of trade would continue. Only security-related part would be in trouble. So as I said, the 5G, deep sea cable and TikTok, WeChat, semiconductors. These things are in trouble, but that's for national security reasons. And there the problem was the Trump administration was pushing this very hard, but it was a solo drama. It must be orchestrated as a whole West, and transatlantic relationship must be repaired. And we should cooperate together with us, Europe, and Americans. Value is important because you have to choose a starting point of your arguments. It's not logic. The first point is something more very important inside you. That's conscience. Conscience is equal for everybody, and this is human dignity. And any nation community based upon this principle survived the 20th century. And big wars, communism, dictatorship, everybody who did not respect that failed and caused huge trouble to everybody, killed millions. And we should not repeat that. Value is very important. Where you stand in the first place. You can name it God, love, care, truth, but this is the same thing, the conscience. And this is very important. We can never lose this again. Okay, Korea is okay. Quads, as I said, we have no NATO, no EU in Asia. And US is far away. Australia is far away. And China is very big today. And we have to engage China. We don't want a war. We simply want to engage them, talk to equal footings, engage them, and persuade them. And we need the Indians. The future big superpower. And this Quad. Why is this Quad? Because we have only 4. And we have to engage Europeans then, Europeans and ASEAN nations. So Quad is the first step. We need Koreans inside, we need Europeans and ASEAN nations. The next step. This is the Quad. Okay.
Thank you. Ambassador Vlahutin, on this Indo-Pacific strategy, when will this be ready? But probably if you could also say something from your perspectives on this values issue, on which Professor Kanehara said a lot, and then we'll have to finish in about 3 minutes. So our time is almost.
Sure. You know that the discussion about the Indo-Pacific strategy has really picked up here in Brussels. We had 3 sort of individual strategies from 3 member states, France, Netherlands, and Germany, that have tabled their vision of the strategy. And there are intensive discussions here. So I think this is something that is going to be high on the agenda and is a part of realization, or the new realization of the importance of not only European pivot to Asia, but Asian pivot to Europe, and how we can do this best. On the values, I would fully agree that it's about, in the end, it's about your conscience. And I come from a country that, I'm a Croat. I went through a war in the middle of Europe not so long time ago. So I know a thing or two about that. And I think really creating a system where we are predictable to each other and where we can trust each other, so that we can manage an increasingly difficult world is super important. When you look at the security challenges today, they are absolutely not only different, but multiple from what was 30, 40 years ago. From this perspective, Cold War is simple. You have different agents and different systems, and it is something that is, of course, danger to all of us. So I think there is no other solution but for the like-minded countries to join in trying to bring sort of rational management of these threats. And I think in the future there will only be more multilateralism, not less multilateralism. It's a question of common sense. It's really something that in the end benefits each and every one of us.
Thank you very much. We have come at the end of our webinar, but I still have some announcements first. the mission of Japan to the EU has circulated this questionnaire, which they would like you to fill in if you have the time. It's on the chat box, you can find it there. There was also a question whether the recordings of the seminar will be available. It's recorded on YouTube and is available there. And there are some people also watching on YouTube, so you can find it there. And there was also somebody asking Professor Kanehara whether he could have your email, a student who was following this and who's making a thesis on EU-Japan relationship. I think we can pass on your email to him. Let's say that, I mean, he can be in touch with you and probably ask him further questions. But with this, I don't know whether Stefania still wants to add something. She just published a piece on the Indo-Pacific partnership, and it's on her website just now, but she helped me with organizing this seminar. A final word from you, Stefania?
Thank you very much. I think we all learned a lot today, and it really contributed to bringing richness in the discussion of what is, I believe, still at the beginning, a discussion that will need to continue and get deeper and deeper. So thank you very much for sharing your insights today with us, and very much looking forward to continue this engaged discussion. Thank you all.
Oh, thank you, Professor Kanehara, and let's hope that we can see you again. And Ambassador Prahutin, I hope we see each other in Brussels as soon as this COVID crisis is over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and honor.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.